Loki became pregnant. No one protested. No one questioned how the god of war and mischief turned into a mare, mated, and gave birth to an 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, the divine steed of the skies. Blood pooled beneath him as he returned to his male form. And the Norse called it a miracle. Because gods could cross boundaries that mortals could not even approach. Where divine bodies shifted freely between male and female, human bodies were shackled by rules that punished even a glance in the wrong direction. In the smoke-hung halls of the north, elders told stories of Odin donning women's robes to practice seer, magic marked as feminine, soft, forbidden. Their listeners nodded in reverence. The same listeners would exile, humiliate, or kill a man for doing the same. Sacred when divine. Shameful when human. Viking society had no word for what passed between men in the night. This wasn't ignorance, it was control. Silence is not absence. It is strategy. What was left unnamed could never be defended, never given dignity, never made real in the eyes of the law. No code outlawed love or lust between men. Instead, the law punished posture. Not the act, but who knelt. A man who took was still a man. A man who was taken was something else entirely. Terms existed not for the act, but for the transformation it implied, arg, urgi, soren. Each carved its own scar across the male body. They didn't describe shame, they produced it. Masculinity became a performance of hardness. One slip, one accusation, and the curtain dropped. Gods could shift and change with impunity. Men who tried were erased, stripped of name, rank, and recognition. This wasn't contradiction. It was design. The gods could bend rules because they made them. Men, trapped beneath, walked carefully, shoulders back, voice deep, days hard, making sure no one ever suspected what they desired, or worse, what had been done to them. There was no word for the act. Only for the ruin that followed. The runestone rose from the village center like a granite finger, pointing accusation toward the sky. Fresh chisel marks spelled out a single word, Argra. Not a description. A sentence. To call a man Arga was to brand him deeper than iron, to signal that his masculinity had collapsed in on itself. In Viking society, honor wasn't an inner truth, it was architecture. A fortress built from conquest, harvest, lineage, and violence. But nothing demolished it faster than submission. Not failure. Not weakness. But the wrong kind of posture. The law made this terror explicit. According to the Grágis codes of Iceland, a man accused of being Soren, sexually used, had one path to redemption, blood. He had the right, even the obligation, to challenge his accuser to combat. This was not a ritual for truth. It was a ritual for restoration. You either killed the man who spoke the insult or died proving you were not what he claimed. Denial meant nothing. Evidence meant less. The word itself was the wound. Once spoken aloud, it bled through the social fabric, and the stain could not be washed away. This was a system built on imbalance. A Viking warrior who raped male captives was not condemned, he was exalted. The act proved power, proved conquest, reaffirmed his dominance. But the man who received that violence was no longer a man. He became a symbol, a warning, an empty shape moving through the village with no voice and no weight. The vocabulary of shame thickened around him. Knee for disgrace, ragra for cowardice, blower for softness. Each word traced the same fear, that masculinity could be undone not by failure in battle, but by surrender of the body. And so, men learned to harden themselves constantly. They spoke with measured tones. They laughed only when laughter proved control. Eye contact became a threat. Affection became a trap. Winter evenings in the hall required choreography. Men sat just far enough apart. They drank together but touched nothing else. The law laid the foundation, but daily life enforced it. Even the falsely accused found their voices dimmed in council, their presence tolerated but never invited. They became ghosts among the living, socially erased, legally invisible. The runestone did not mark a grave. It marked a man who still breathed, still worked, still walked, but whose honor had died long before his body ever would. He sat cross-legged in the dirt outside the assembly hall, spine straight despite exhaustion, hands resting on his knees in a posture meant to convey neither defiance nor surrender. Every movement had become strategy. 3 days had passed since the word was spoken, Soren, hurled like a spear into the crowded air, and nothing had been the same since. No witness had seen a sexual act. No physical evidence existed. But Viking law required neither. Reputation was not something proved. It was something believed. And once enough people believed, it became real, real as steel, final as death. The man's vigil was not for justice. It was for survival. He no longer pleaded. He endured. As the sun rose and fell, villagers passed him with deliberate blindness. Children were pulled away when they wandered too close, absorbing lessons about shame they could not yet name. Merchants lowered their voices. His wife no longer spoke to him, not from anger, but from necessity. Association with disgrace could stain her, their children, the bloodline. The system protected itself by making compassion dangerous. He was no longer fully expelled, nor fully accepted. He lived in a space between social life and social death, present, but erased. Viking law allowed him to challenge his accuser to a duel, but in practice, that door had already closed. Few would witness such a fight, fewer still would acknowledge its result. If he won, it proved nothing. If he lost, it confirmed everything. The law permitted blood, but society demanded silence. And in that silence, his identity unraveled. No gods would intervene. Not the ones who changed forms and genders in myth. Their freedom was divine exception, not mortal permission. What a god could do in story, no man could do in life. Sacred narratives floated above the law, while real men choked beneath it. His crime was not action. It was accusation. And once accused, his body became an object, interpreted, avoided, feared. He still breathed, still worked, still moved. But he no longer belonged to himself. He had become the law's lesson, living proof that masculinity was not defined by strength or courage, but by posture, by rumor, by the fragile choreography of never bending in the wrong direction. The deck groaned beneath the weight of warriors and seawater, but what made the ship heavy was not cargo, it was spectacle. A chieftain knelt in the center, stripped of clothes, title, and identity. Salt wind lashed against his skin, but it was not the cold that made him tremble. His wrists were bound, not to prevent escape, but to force posture, to ensure the body conveyed submission. Around him, the raiders did not jeer. They watched. Silent. Focused. This was not rage. This was choreography. The ritual was not spontaneous violence. It was calculated degradation. His humiliation served no personal pleasure. It served the system. The Vikings understood that domination was more than conquest of land, it was conquest of form. By making a man kneel, receive, collapse, they turned power inside out. The chieftain had been the law in his village. Now, he was proof that law could be broken through flesh. His defeat was not death. It was transformation. He would survive. That was the point. A dead man is forgotten. A broken one becomes the message. His walk would change. His voice would carry hesitation. He would flinch at certain gestures. His people would read the shame in his breath long before they heard his story. And that story did not need words. It was written in skin. What had been done to him would pass from body to body, not through action, but through fear. The raiders had mastered this technique. Sexual conquest was not desire. It was doctrine. Pleasure was not sought, it was weaponized. What should have been mutual, sacred, even tender, became a scalpel used to peel identity from bone. The audience around him learned as much as he did. Captives were forced to watch. Allies took notes in silence. The ship became a classroom where submission was the lesson and the human body, the chalkboard. The chieftain's breath came shallow. His eyes stared into the planks below, unfocused. His body had not been destroyed, but hollowed. And that hollowing was the true objective. He would return to his village as a living warning. He would sit at feasts, carry water, whisper advice, but no one would meet his gaze. No law would prosecute him. No edict would be written. And yet his status would hang over every conversation, every silence, like smoke in the rafters. What the sword could not sever, posture could. In Viking raids, silver was secondary. The real treasure was narrative control, rewriting the masculine form through submission. They did not need theology. They did not need gods. They needed only one man to kneel and another to watch. In the end, it was not the blade that taught fear. It was the look in a broken man's eyes. Incense curled through the sacred space as Odin knelt in the posture reserved for women, robes trailing in the dirt, fingers tracing runes in circles only the seeresses dared draw. His voice, low and rhythmic, wove seer spells meant to call spirits, bend fate, unravel the fabric of masculine control. No one interrupted. No one dared. Because Odin was not a man. He was a god. And gods could cross boundaries that would ruin mortal lives. The Norse did not hide these stories, they revered them. Loki gave birth. Odin wore dresses. Divine beings flowed between genders as if the categories were water, not stone. But in the mortal world, those same gestures carried the weight of death. If a man donned a woman's cloak, if he practiced feminine magic, if he showed softness, surrender, receptivity, he was not praised, he was marked. Argra. Burgi. Sorin. The words that had no equivalent in heaven, but cut deep into the earth. Viking society did not forbid these behaviors outright. It did something more enduring, it condemned the mortal who dared reflect the divine. The gods were not examples. They were exemptions. What elevated them destroyed men. The same posture that signaled wisdom in Odin became humiliation in a farmer. The same flowing robes that symbolized power in myth meant weakness in law. Authority was positional, not behavioral. Gods could return to masculinity at will. Men, once crossed, could never go back. A man found practicing seer might survive, but he would not endure. He would lose his name before he lost his life. The system allowed gods to transgress because their status made them untouchable. Mortals, lacking that shield of sacredness, became casualties of mimicry. And yet the stories persisted, told by firelight, whispered over mead, shaping the minds of boys who would one day police one another with the very myths they adored. The contradiction wasn't a flaw. It was the engine. The stories gave men a glimpse of freedom, freedom to feel, to yield, to cross the invisible lines carved into their bodies at birth, and then reminded them that those freedoms were not theirs to claim. The line between sacred and shameful was never about the act. It was about who performed it. Odin knelt in a circle of power. A man who knelt that way in a longhouse would be spat on, beaten, exiled. The gods did not break rules. They revealed them. They showed mortals what was forbidden not through silence, but through unreachable example. And so the system fed on its own impossibility, worship what you must never become. Revere what you must never imitate. Tell stories about the gods who crossed the line, so that no man ever would. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass of the monastery, casting broken colors across stone and skin. A man knelt once more, not before warriors or elders, but before the cross. His posture had not changed. His shame had. Where Viking law had called him Sorin and demanded blood to restore honor, Christian doctrine gave him a new name, sodomite, and offered no path to redemption but pain. The insult was no longer social, it was cosmic. Under Norse codes, a man could fight to reclaim himself. Now, he could only confess. The whip replaced the sword. The monk's silence replaced the crowd's jeering. Each lash was not punishment, but purification. The body, once a site of scandal, became a battlefield for the soul. Flesh bore the lessons the spirit had failed to learn. The words changed. Arga became abomination, knee became unnatural, but the fear remained. The architecture remained. Viking society had policed masculinity through honor. Christianity did it through guilt. And guilt required no witness. No accusation. Only knowledge of the self. A man did not need to be seen kneeling, he only had to imagine it. And in that imagining, he became corrupted. The system had evolved. It no longer needed public rituals or stone markers. It needed only doctrine. Surveillance had moved inward. The scars on his back bled beneath the robe of penitence. His crime had not changed, it was still submission, still softness, still the failure to dominate, but now it threatened not just his name, but his soul. The monastery bells rang like warnings. The law had become eternal. The punishment no longer ended at the edge of the village. It stretched beyond death. And so the man knelt as others had before him, same posture, same silence, same destruction, made holy only by the change in vocabulary. Centuries passed. The gods fell silent. The crosses that once sanctified pain became museum relics. The runestones weathered. The monasteries crumbled. But the architecture endured, not in temples, but in courtrooms, classrooms, jokes, and gestures. What began with Ogre and Soren, what became sodomite and abomination, now hid behind words like disorder, pathology, not normal, just a phase. The vocabulary shifted. The sentence remained. The male body that yielded, that softened, that failed to dominate, still triggered the same machinery. No longer exile. No longer whips. Just silence. Ridicule. Absence. Boys learned the new codes before they learned language. Sit straighter. Speak deeper. Don't cry. Don't look too long. Don't laugh the wrong way. Don't flinch. Don't feel. They inherited the ghost of Viking honor dressed in modern skin. The punishment was no longer public but internal, loneliness, isolation, the constant throb of trying to disappear without dying. The systems no longer needed law or clergy. They needed habit, culture, algorithms. A man bends too gently, and the room changes. A boy holds another's gaze too long, and the laughter shifts. Eyes become weapons. Gestures become betrayals. The body remains the battlefield. Submission is still marked, not by runes or scripture, but by suspicion. The insult comes quieter now, under breath, in comment sections, in Father's narrowed eyes. But it lands in the same place. Deep. The thread has never broken. It only buried itself deeper, wrapped around memory, story, posture, until even those who suffer it cannot always name it. The gods who once crossed boundaries are now cartoons. The men who still cross them walk with caution. The silence continues. The punishment continues. The system continues. What began in longhouses still lives in locker rooms, boardrooms, family dinners, dating apps. The words have changed. The wound has not. This was never about love. It was always about control. Always about who gets to take, and who must never be taken.